Dear HBO Max, I just learned you intend to make a genre-bending comedic origin story of Judy Jetson. When I heard this new version of Judy Jetson wouldn't be boy crazy, the only word I had to describe my disgust is jinkies. If there is one thing the internet agrees on, it's that you should never change anything ever. I hope you die. Sincerely, Velma.
That was a clip from the first teaser trailer for Velma last year. I think they were trying to get in front of whatever backlash they thought they would receive, but it didn't really work out for them in the long run. But I think this attitude speaks to a wider problem when it comes to entertainment pretty much across the board, at least in my opinion, which is spite. Basically, they know they're going to upset people, and not only do they not care, in some cases they're actively leaning into it. Because they're assuming the backlash will get them attention, just like the old "there is no bad publicity" line.
We know everything, thanks.
And you know nothing? It's a shame you're not a woman anymore. Because she'd have understood.
Something a male-presenting Time Lord will never understand.
But I think this approach to content creation is a mistake, and there's a lot of examples of this kind of marketing backfiring. Ultimately, a lot of this does boil down to politics. For a long time now, there's been an effort to push things like diversity, equity, and inclusion in modern media, both from individual activists and also big companies behind the scenes, like BlackRock, which state as much on their website. But unfortunately, the way they handle these messages tend to be very heavy-handed, and they often insist that long-existing IPs need to be updated for modern audiences, or even that they have to fix these original properties because they have harmful messages. Everything from Star Wars to the Disney Princess franchise. And in my opinion, oftentimes this criticism just isn't really fair. We made a video defending Disney princesses 5 years ago, and that video is still relevant today. But this attitude has still been persistent in the media. And oftentimes when people question their decisions, they just get really smug. Like the Velma example from the beginning of the video. We also saw this a while back with a creator named Kelly Sue DeConnick, who very infamously said that anyone who doesn't like her politics just shouldn't buy her book.
And if you don't like my politics, don't buy my book. Problem solved.
I understand having a target audience in mind, and people outside of that target audience might have trouble finding enjoyment in it, but the amount of smugness and spite does not read well. It's like they make projects with an anti-audience in mind. It's almost like they're excited to annoy people, so instead of telling a story because they're passionate about it, they're mostly just doing it out of spite. And they're hoping that this new audience that will come and support them will also point at laughing the old audience that they chased away. And it's something that we see over and over again. I don't think political themes are inherently the problem here, because you can have stories with strong political themes that resonate with audiences. It's just that those themes have to serve the story, instead of just being there to stick it to the audience. For example, Static Shock is very well remembered, and that show dealt with a lot of political themes, like racism, homelessness, and even school shootings, but these topics were handled with a level of nuance, and the stories they tell are grounded. But unfortunately, that's something that's been missing in these activist-driven shows. Most of the time, the characters end up being stereotypes or caricatures, even ones that we're supposed to be rooting for, but that's because they're not as important as the message that they're trying to push. And it just ends up being awkward and falling flat. Doctor Who recently shook things up by having a bi-generational doctor. They brought back David Tennant, probably for nostalgia bait. But anyway, he is now alongside the 15th Doctor, who was the first queer and black Doctor, but the lead up to this series was again very spiteful and confrontational. There's already been a lot of drama surrounding Doctor Who, and this is just adding to it. They immediately come out with a rage-baiting post calling out straight white men, which they know is going to get a lot of pushback in this day and age, but that's what rage bait is for. They also made multiple statements about how if you don't like it, then don't watch it, only for the show to premiere with the lowest rating since it first premiered way back in the 60s. They were very adamant about the direction they wanted to go in, even though they did acknowledge they were getting backlash for it. Like Ncuti Gatwa, the actor who is playing the 15th Doctor, saying that he wanted to have a fight scene where he twerks a monster to death. That would certainly be a choice. It just comes off like a big spectacle, instead of taking the story more seriously. And you know how sci-fi nerds are. I say that with love, I'm one of them. This isn't even the first time they're talking about LGBT themes on the show. Back in 2005, they introduced a character named Captain Jack Harkness, who was openly bisexual and played by an openly gay actor, And that character was so popular, he got his own spin-off series called Torchwood. It kind of comes off like when Disney kept saying that they were introducing the first gay character, and they did it like 7 times. Just saying. The last show I want to talk about is a show called Mr. Birchum. This show is from the Daily Wire, which makes conservative content. They feel very strongly that the media has been too left-leaning, so they decided to make their own show but with the politics that they wanted to see.
I'm a vegan.
And they came out of the gate insisting that they were going to be as offensive as possible, and how originally this show was pitched decades ago but no one wanted to pick it up because it would be too offensive to the wrong people. But the Daily Wire loves to be offensive to those people, so they were going to do it. Again, they come off as being extremely spiteful and more concerned with their anti-audience than their actual audience. The guy behind this show apparently worked on shows like Drawn Together and The Man Show, so I was initially expecting this show to be pretty edgy, but in the end the only thing offensive about it was how unfunny it was. This was probably the tamest adult show I've ever seen, but it was definitely cringe. This show was less South Park and more old man yells at cloud meme. It follows Mr. Birchum, who's basically a self-insert of the creator. He's even voiced by him. This show ends up making the same mistakes that Velma did, but at least it's an original property. That has to count for something. So on top of being overly spiteful in the marketing, this show is also another cringy self-insert fest. The same total lack of self-awareness, not having an actual fleshed out character with strengths and flaws, and just reveling in your own wish fulfillment. He even hired his crush to play his animated wife. And there's a scene where the character rants at a podium and everybody stands and claps. All the kids who hated him previously all of a sudden love him just out of nowhere. Meanwhile, his rival, this man-bun straw man for the left, is more times than not actually in the right. I'm not sure how they managed to mess this up. In the first episode, Mr. Birchum forces his class to come to his house on the weekend and tells them all to not tell their parents, which is a huge red flag. He makes them work on his deck, and for some reason, the only person concerned about this is the left-leaning straw man. And then in the second episode, the teachers ditch because it's Veterans Day, which makes no sense because they should have the day off at a public school. Veterans Day is a federal holiday. Again, the only person who's concerned about this is the left-leaning straw man. It's like how in Velma, Fred ended up being the best character even though you weren't supposed to like him, but he was the only one that actually had a character arc. And you can't help but feel sorry for him considering all the child abuse. And in this show, the man bun guy ends up being the only character with common sense, despite the fact that he's supposed to be considered unreasonable. Literally the only thing I liked about this show was that Birchum has a Stanley thermos, like the original one. That is so on brand. Shows like Mr. Birchum or Velma weren't created to entertain people first and foremost. They were created to entertain the people who made them, so they could make fun of people they don't like, and pat themselves on the back for being smarter and better than everybody else. And that spite really shows through in the writing, and it's not doing either show any favors.
I'm a heteronormative, cisgendered white male. For which I apologize.
Mr. Birchum often gets compared to Hank Hill from King of the Hill, another show that's told from a conservative perspective, but that show is basically everything that this show wishes it was. Hank isn't obnoxious or unlikable, and he's actually pretty nuanced, something this show is desperately missing, and it's bombing in the ratings. Well deserved. Even conservatives are saying that it sucks. You're better off just watching King of the Hill, maybe even All in the Family if you're actually looking for something edgy. And that show was from 50 years ago. It's just really frustrating and kind of sad to see all this spite in the media. They had the opportunity to make great shows that entertain the audience, while also saying something meaningful, but instead they choose to do this. There's not really much passion here. It's mostly just pointing fingers. Criticism can get frustrating, but maybe you shouldn't feed the trolls, and instead focus on meaningful stories that would resonate with people. I can only hope we'll see a shift away from this kind of content. I think it would be best, but that's my opinion. What do you guys think? Do you think spite is harming the current landscape of media? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, everyone. I really appreciate it. Before I go, I want to give a shout out to our members: Tyrant Carnivore, Shiny Orc Boy, General Bolivar, Depth Charge Media, Samaru163, Gabby Hime, Verdant Range, JVR, Phil C, Taylor Ramirez, Equestron, Norman Sweet Cream, Way Beyond Coincidence, Hunter Rose, 80s Nostalgia Guy, Felix Spam, Lucas Geist, Jay Draws, Meowsers, Sky, Jinke Z, Philip, Isaac Martinez, Garcia XV Legend, Tobias Weller, Bandito Bane, Mac B909, Caleb Nelson, Data Dine Executive, Crimson Phantom, and Dakari the Professor. Thank you all so much for your support. If you'd like to become a member, you can hit the join button next to the subscribe button. We also have a Buy Me Coffee if you want to support us that way. If you enjoyed the video, you can leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content. And that part's free. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.